The city of Santa Fe had always intrigued me. The old town was steeped in history, its narrow, dusty streets tangled with the stories of generations past. But what had drawn me here wasn't the charm or the folklore, it was the need for a new beginning. After years of dorm life at university, I craved peace, isolation, and independence. A place where no one could find me. That's when I found it, the apartment. It was small, tucked away in a forgotten corner of a crumbling building on the outskirts of town. The rent was ridiculously cheap, and the landlord seemed almost too eager to sign the lease. It wasn't exactly luxurious, faded walls, creaky floors, and the faint smell of mildew. But it was mine. I arrived with nothing but a suitcase and a few boxes. The building stood in eerie silence as I walked up the narrow staircase, past the cracked windows and peeling paint. I didn't care. This would be my sanctuary. The apartment itself was on the third floor, the farthest from the street below. The front door creaked open, revealing a small living space with a single window that overlooked an overgrown alley. It wasn't much, but it was all I needed. As I placed my suitcase on the floor and surveyed the room, something caught my eye, something out of place. A dusty, framed photograph hanging crookedly on the wall. It was of the building, taken years ago, back when it still stood proudly. But what unsettled me wasn't the photograph itself. It was the figure in the window, the faint outline of a person staring out. I shrugged it off. It was probably just an old tenant, some long-forgotten memory captured in time. But the image lingered in my mind. The first few days passed without incident. I fell into a routine, waking up early, working late into the night, and spending weekends exploring the city. But as the days wore on, I began to notice odd things happening around the apartment. The lights flickered constantly. At first, it was just a minor nuisance. I figured it was the wiring, the old building settling. But then it got worse. One night, I was in the kitchen making dinner when the light above me flickered to life on its own. I had clearly switched it off earlier, but now it blazed brightly, casting long shadows across the room. I turned it off again, but minutes later, it flashed back on. I shook my head. Maybe it was a fault in the switch. Later that night, as I was brushing my teeth, I heard a faint sound from the kitchen, a low, almost imperceptible creak. I paused, unsure of what I had heard, then continued my routine. But when I went to grab a glass of water, I froze. The fridge door was wide open, though I was certain I had closed it earlier. I quickly shut it, dismissing the growing sense of unease in my chest. These were just the quirks of an old apartment, I reasoned. It was nothing. But then the small, seemingly insignificant events grew more unsettling. My toothbrush moved on its own. My book, left on the table, was found across the room, as if someone had been flipping through it. The noises became louder at night, scratching sounds, soft knocks, faint whispers. But there was never anyone there. I didn't want to admit it, but I was starting to feel a sense of paranoia creeping in. So when Liam, an old friend from college, came over one evening, I thought his company would be a welcome distraction. We sat by the window, catching up on old times as the last rays of sunset faded behind the trees. The apartment was quiet, almost too quiet, and the feeling of being watched loomed heavy in the air. Then Liam turned pale. He shifted uncomfortably, staring across the street. "Do you see that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I followed his gaze. There, through the gaps in the blinds of the opposite building, I saw it. A faint movement, shadows darting behind the curtains. I blinked, unsure if my eyes were deceiving me. But when I looked again, the figure was gone. "There's no one there," I said, forcing a laugh. "It's probably just the wind." But Liam didn't laugh. His eyes were wide, his body tense with fear. "No, you don't understand. I've seen them. Every night. Figures in that building. Watching. I tried to reassure him. The building was abandoned, I said. It had been for years. There was no one there. But Liam wasn't convinced. I know what I saw, he said quietly, standing up and walking toward the door. And I don't think we're alone in this building. I didn't believe him, of course. But something about his tone, the look in his eyes, made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. As the days turned into weeks, I began to feel an increasing sense of dread. The apartment no longer felt like a refuge. It felt wrong. There was something lurking in the air, something watching, waiting. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that the walls themselves were alive with something I couldn't understand. One night, unable to sleep, I sat by the window, staring out at the fog that had settled over the city. The silence was overwhelming. And then, I saw it again. A figure in the window of the building across the street. A dark, vague silhouette standing perfectly still, watching me. I froze. My heart raced. I could barely breathe. I quickly turned away from the window, but the figure remained etched in my mind. It felt like it was waiting for me to acknowledge it, like it had been there all along, watching me, growing closer with each passing day. The knocking started that night. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on my door. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but then it came again. 3 knocks. Always at the same time, just past midnight. I opened the door, heart pounding, but there was no one there. Just an empty hallway stretching into the darkness. The days dragged on, each one feeling longer than the last. I tried to leave, but the doors wouldn't open. No matter how hard I pulled or pushed, the apartment seemed to keep me locked inside. The windows were sealed shut, as though the apartment itself was holding me prisoner. I began to lose track of time. Days blurred into nights. The shadows that stretched across the walls at dusk seemed to move on their own, lengthening and curling like fingers, reaching toward me. I heard whispers now. Soft, unintelligible voices calling to me from the other side of the apartment, from the walls themselves. It was as if the apartment was alive, feeding off my fear, drawing me deeper into its grasp. I tried to leave again, desperate to escape. I ran to the door and wrenched it open, but as I stepped into the hallway, the building seemed to shift. The hallway stretched longer, darker, narrowing with each step I took. The air grew thick, suffocating. It wasn't just the apartment that was trapping me. It was something else, something ancient, something malevolent. I was not meant to leave. The whispers grew louder, more urgent. I stumbled across an old journal hidden beneath the floorboards. Its pages were yellowed with age, the ink smudged from years of exposure. It belonged to Samuel Green, the original tenant of the building. He had lived here alone, much like me, seeking refuge in the solitude of the apartment. But what I read in his journal made my blood run cold. Samuel had been an artist, a man of great passion, but over time, he became consumed by the building. He wrote about the shadows, about the figures in the windows, about the whispers that drove him to madness. He spoke of a hidden room in the basement, a place sealed off by the building's strange design, a room that housed something else. I could feel it then, the pull. The same pull Samuel had felt years ago. I had to find it. The hidden room was real. I found it behind a false wall in the basement, hidden beneath the floorboards. The air was stale, thick with the scent of decay. And as I stepped inside, the darkness seemed to close in around me. The room was small, barely big enough to turn around in. The walls were covered in symbols, ancient and unrecognizable. And in the center of the room was a small, black stone altar, smeared with what looked like old blood. It wasn't until I touched the altar that I understood. The apartment wasn't just haunted, it was a gateway, a portal to something far darker. The entity that had been haunting me was no mere ghost. It was an ancient force, one that fed on fear and isolation. It had consumed Samuel Green. And now, it wanted me. I tried to run, but the room itself began to shift. The walls pressed in, the air thickened, and the ground beneath me began to tremble. I could hear the whispering voices now, clearer than ever. They were coming for me. 2 months ago, my best friend, Tyler, vanished from his apartment without a single trace. No warning. No note. Nothing. It was as if he had simply disappeared. His family, his friends, the police, everyone was left in the dark. They found nothing. No signs of struggle, no clues as to where he had gone or why. I couldn't shake the image of Tyler. I couldn't stop thinking about him the way he had left everything behind. His guitar, his jacket, even the lingering scent of his cologne. It felt wrong, unnatural. After weeks of unanswered questions and empty silence, I made a choice. I would move into his apartment. The landlord offered me a ridiculously cheap deal. The apartment had been sitting untouched since Tyler's disappearance, and I didn't ask too many questions. It was small, simple, and plain. Nothing special, nothing remarkable. But as soon as I walked inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Tyler's presence seemed to cling to the walls. His belongings were still here, his guitar, his jacket, even his cologne still hung faintly in the air. Yet, Tyler was gone. I couldn't help but feel like I was walking into a room where someone was supposed to be, but they just stepped out. On my first night, everything seemed calm. The apartment was quiet, almost too quiet. The air in here felt heavy with the kind of silence that you could never fully escape. I unpacked what little I had and made the place as comfortable as I could. But, no matter what I did, I couldn't rid myself of that feeling, the one that told me something wasn't right. That night, as I was brushing my teeth, it happened. A sound. 3 slow knocks, coming from the closet in the hallway. Knock. 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 It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. I froze, toothpaste in my mouth, my heart suddenly racing. It wasn't the pipes. It couldn't be. The knocks were too deliberate. Too slow. I stared at the door. The closet door. Then back at the mirror. I didn't move for a long time. My mind raced. Was I hearing things? Was I just exhausted? I didn't know. But I couldn't bring myself to ignore it. I slept with the hallway light on that night. By the second day, the strange occurrences didn't stop. They started to multiply. The door to Tyler's old bedroom, the room where I never dared to go, kept opening on its own. Every night, I made sure to close it, only to find it ajar the next morning. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but the door always opened. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was the wind. The old building had its quirks. But it kept happening. It became a pattern I couldn't ignore. I texted Tyler's sister, asking her if anything strange had ever happened in the apartment, but her response sent a chill down my spine. Don't go into that room at night. Something about her tone made me uneasy. It was as though she knew something I didn't. But that was the problem, wasn't it? I didn't know what was going on here. That night, something snapped in me. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to know what was in Tyler's room, the room he had left untouched. I stood in front of the door, my hand on the handle, hesitating. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn away, but I couldn't. I opened the door. The room was cold. The air inside was heavy, as if the room itself was holding its breath. It was exactly as Tyler had left it. The bed was unmade, his guitar sat in the same place, untouched. But there was something else. Notes. Scattered on the desk. The handwriting was sloppy, frantic. "Don't trust it. It's coming. Run." I shuddered as I read each one. They made no sense. Why had Tyler written them? What did they mean? Then, the noise. A creak. A soft, low sound from the closet. The door opened slowly, and I saw it. A shadow. A tall, thin figure, standing in the dark, blocking the doorway to the closet. It looked human, but it wasn't. It moved toward me, silently, like it was gliding rather than walking. My mind screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. The figure didn't come closer, it just stood there, still and silent, as if it were waiting. Watching. The next morning, I did the only thing I could think of. I checked the security footage from the cameras Tyler had set up in the apartment. I scrolled through the recordings, watching them in silence, the dread in my chest growing heavier with each passing second. In one of the videos, Tyler sat on his bed, eyes wide, staring straight ahead. And behind him there it was again. The shadow. It moved closer, slowly, like it was creeping up on him, but Tyler never seemed to notice. It moved just out of his peripheral vision, always just behind him. And then, it turned. It looked directly at the camera. It saw me. I froze. My heart stopped. The figure knew I was watching. I couldn't tear my eyes away. The video ended, but the sensation of being watched didn't leave. It lingered. Days passed, but the apartment felt different. The strange occurrences became more frequent, more intense. The refrigerator was always full of food I hadn't bought. At first, I thought I was just forgetting to go to the store, but then I noticed how perfectly everything was arranged. It wasn't just food, it was a carefully planned arrangement. Like someone had been there, placing things in a precise order. I began to feel a creeping sense of paranoia, of being watched. I wasn't alone in the apartment, even when no one else was there. I could feel eyes on me. My friend Kyle, who was staying with me, started noticing it too. One night, Kyle pulled me aside. "I checked the hallway camera," he said, his voice trembling. "I saw us. Two people who looked just like us, dressed exactly like we are right now, leaving the apartment." He paused, and his eyes widened. "But they never came back." That's when I realized it. We were being watched. But not just by the apartment. By something else. Something that wanted us there. Then came the day that shattered everything I thought I understood. Kyle and I woke up one morning to realize we had lost days. We couldn't remember anything that had happened. The apartment looked different, furniture had moved, the walls were freshly painted, and one of the light switches was missing. How could we have lost time? How could we have not remembered? We searched the apartment, but there was no trace of what had happened. Everything was changed, but we couldn't explain why. I tried to leave. I had to. But every time I reached the door, I couldn't open it. It was as if the door itself was resisting me, as if something was keeping me inside. I stayed up that night, staring at the front door, trying to figure out how to escape. The next morning, I woke up and realized everything had changed again. The refrigerator was older, the furniture was new. Even the wallpaper was different. It was like the apartment was shifting, changing, but we couldn't remember how or why. One morning, I woke up to find Kyle's room completely empty. His bed was neatly made, his belongings gone, his phone still charging on the nightstand. There were no signs of a struggle. No note. No explanation. It was as if he had vanished. I called his mother, desperate for answers. "We talked last Tuesday," she said, her voice sounding distant, as if the conversation had happened just the day before. But I didn't remember it. I had no memory of it. As the days bled into each other, I realized the horrifying truth: The apartment wasn't just a haunted space. It was a prison. I couldn't leave. No matter how hard I tried, no matter what I did, the apartment kept me inside. One morning, I found another note on the refrigerator. It was simple. Welcome back. It hit me then. This wasn't just an apartment. It was a trap. A trap that had been set long before I even knew it. And I was never going to escape. I don't know how long it's been. Time no longer has any meaning. The apartment is the only thing that exists now. If you ever find yourself in a place where everything seems wrong, where the food in the fridge isn't yours, where you hear things when no one's around, don't hesitate. Don't wait for it to come for you. Leave. Run. Before it traps you too.